Astronauts expose the most shocking sights witnessed in space. What's out there? There are countless questions surrounding the cosmos and extraterrestrials, and it seems like NASA and the US government haven't always been perfectly honest about these topics. Thankfully, a number of well-traveled astronauts have shared some of their most unusual celestial experiences with the public, and sometimes without official permission. 1. Ghostly green light. Many astronauts have encountered similar unexplained phenomena while in orbit. Back in 1963, Leroy Gordon Cooper Jr. became one of the first Americans to venture into space. But when he got back to Earth, it wasn't what he'd done that brought him notoriety. Rather, it was what he saw. Cooper reportedly claimed to have observed a circular object emitting green light speeding towards his ship. Fortunately, it didn't make any contact, but what was it? To this day, the apparition remains unexplained. 2. Clouds of smoke. In 2004, Russian news website Pravda.ru published some eye-catching claims from the cosmonaut Vladimir Kovalyanuk. He had spent a total of 217 days in space, including time aboard Soviet Union space stations. The astronaut told a news website, "When I was working at the Salyut orbital station, I saw something strange in a porthole one day. The object was the size of a finger. I was surprised to see it was an orbiting object. It was hard to determine the size and the speed of an object in space." Kovalyanuk continued, "That's why I cannot say exactly what size it actually was. My colleague Savinch prepared to take a picture of it, but the UFO suddenly exploded. Only clouds of smoke were left, and the object split into two interconnected pieces. It was reminiscent of a dumbbell." And Kovalyanuk was certain of what he'd seen, adding, "It was probably a UFO, but it was definitely not mysticism. Two people watched it at the same time." 3. Knock knock, who's there? In 2003, Yang Liwei became the first astronaut to travel into space under the auspices of the Chinese space program. A former fighter pilot, Yang was selected as a prospective astronaut in 1998, and after years of training finally got his chance to blast off into space aboard a Shenzhou 5 spacecraft. Blasted into space by a Long March 2F rocket in October 2003, he succeeded in orbiting the Earth 14 times. But something strange happened during Yang's flight. In a 2016 article, the BBC quoted him as saying that he'd heard someone knocking the body of the spaceship just as knocking on an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. Apparently, this sound neither came from outside nor inside the spaceship. Yang even peeked out of his capsule window but saw nothing. And it's all the more mysterious since, because of the physical properties of space, the only sound that you should hear in it is silence. 4. Was it a UFO? The Soviet Union space program selected Musa Manarov as a cosmonaut in 1978. But he had to wait another 9 years for his chance to get into space. His big day came in 1987 when he flew aboard the Soyuz TM-4 to the Soviet's Mir space station. Classed as a flight engineer, Manarov spent almost 366 days in space. In 1990, he returned to space for a mission lasting 175 days on Mir. On that first mission, Manarov and his colleague Vladimir Titov also became the first men to spend a year in space. But there was a factor apart from a year in space that distinguished Manarov. During his second mission in 1991, you see, Manarov was filming the docking of a spaceship that had traveled to Mir. On camera, he caught a strange object, and you can still see the film online today. The cosmonaut was quoted in Shane McMinn's 2016 book, Conspiracies and Solar Secrets, as saying, "It's possible that it was a kind of UFO. We can't say with any certainty what it was." 5. What did this astronaut see? Not only is Christopher Cassidy an astronaut, but he's also a US Navy SEAL, so he's a man of formidable qualities. He first ventured into space aboard NASA's Space Shuttle in 2009, when the shuttle docked with the International Space Station. On that 16-day mission, Cassidy became the 500th astronaut in space, and he performed 3 walks there. But it was on his second mission into space in 2013 that he hit world headlines. Cassidy said that he'd seen an unidentified object floating past the station when he'd looked through one of the International Space Station's portholes. He'd reported this weird apparition to Mission Control, too. It was a puzzle, but not for long. In August 2013, NASA reported that object has been identified by Russian flight controllers as an antenna cover from the Zvezda service module. Even so, there are still those convinced that Cassidy had seen a UFO. 6. Snakes in space. Dr. Story Musgrave was no ordinary astronaut back in the day. For a start, he has 6 academic degrees and is the highest qualified man to have entered space. 6, it seems, is a favorite number for the man since he's also had 6 space flights, one of the few astronauts to achieve that feat. But what's truly fascinating about Musgrave is what he's claimed to have seen when he was in space. In a 1994 interview still available on YouTube, Musgrave says, On 2 of my missions, and I still don't have an answer, I've seen a snake out there. 6, 7, 8 feet long. It's rubbery because it has internal waves in it and it follows you for a rather long time. The more you fly in space, the more you see an incredible amount of things out there, and that sort of thing brings to you really a certainty that other living creatures are out there. And you can make of that what you will. 7. The gray space station that turned orange. Former Italian Air Force pilot Samantha Cristoforetti was the first from her nation to journey into space. Fittingly for an Italian, she was also the first astronaut to brew an espresso in space. In November 2014, she was on board the Soyuz TMA-15 and with 2 colleagues bound for the International Space Station. And it was as her ship approached the station that she reportedly spotted something extremely weird. If you look at photographs of the space station, you'll see that it's predominantly a silvery gray color, but Cristoforetti saw something altogether different. To her, the station was a vivid orange color. As she wrote in a blog post, the enormous solar panels were inundated with a blaze of orange light. Vivid, warm, almost alien. Yet this was a mystery that was later solved. It's a rarely seen phenomenon, but when the sun hits the space station's solar panels in a particular way, an orange hue is cast over the structure. 8. Space makes you taller. It sounds unlikely, but it turns out to be true. Astronauts who spend time on the orbiting International Space Station end up taller than when they left Earth. NASA reckons that a 6-month spell on the space station results on average in a 3% height gain. However, an astronaut's height increase disappears once he or she gets back home. One astronaut appeared to break all records when it came to height gain. In a January 2018 tweet, Japanese national Norishige Kanai announced that he had gained around 3.5 inches after just 3 weeks on the space station. That really would have been something. But shortly afterward, he sheepishly withdrew his claim, blaming a measuring error. He corrected the amount of his height gain to less than an inch. 9. Alien bacteria. A Russian cosmonaut made a startling claim about something he'd found in space in 2017. Anton Shkaplerov made his announcement after his second visit to the International Space Station, and what he said caused quite a stir in the world of space travel, although NASA remained tight-lipped in response. Shkaplerov told the Russian news agency TASS in November 2017 that bacteria discovered on the exterior of the space station was of extraterrestrial origin. He explained, and now it turns out that somehow these swabs reveal bacteria that were absent during the launch of the ISS module. That is, they've come from outer space and settled along the external surface. Sounds more than a little scary, but thankfully the Russian added that the bacteria pose no danger. 10. It's all in the genes. Identical twin brothers Mark and Scott Kelly have spent lifetimes duplicating each other's achievements. Both were captains in the US Navy, for instance, and both have spent time on the International Space Station. But when NASA conducted an experiment that involved monitoring the twins' DNA while Scott was aboard the space station and Mark was on Earth, the results were extraordinary. Scott arrived back on Earth in March 2016 after 346 days on the space station. Yet the results of NASA's monitoring of him and his brother showed that Scott's DNA was now markedly different. British newspaper The Daily Telegraph quoted Scott's reaction, "What? My DNA changed by 7%? Who knew? I no longer have to call Mark my identical twin brother anymore." NASA's work on understanding what happens to the human body and its DNA in space continues. 11. Towering ship. Even every day, people have witnessed strange space phenomena from Earth. On a January morning in Lebanon, Illinois, police officer Ed Barton encountered a gigantic triangular object with a light on each corner, hovering some 1,500 feet overhead. Other Illinois residents saw it too, recounting it was perhaps 3 stories long and resembled a house. There were big windows, about 2.5 feet wide and 5 or 6 feet high, 2 stories, one on top of each other. The nearby Scott Air Force Base claimed its radar had been off at the time of the incident, though a highly reliable source later told Newfork that the Air National Guard jets may have been scrambled to take a look at the object. Some even revealed that government employees had visited local police departments and witnesses to ask them to curtail all their statements to the press. 12. Headed for the mountains. While standing on his front step, a Wenatchee, Washington man watched as a silver triangular craft slowly glided over the tops of a cluster of 150-foot-tall poplar trees. His fascination, however, turned to terror as the man realized the ship was on a crash course for nearby Birch Mountain. But instead of striking the mountain, the craft simply disappeared into thin air. Newfork later confirmed this man's reliability as a witness. "We know this witness and have spoken with him on several occasions. He formerly served in the US military and held a high security clearance." 13. The Collector. On a summer night in Sunnyvale, California in 1971, two teenage girls snuck out of their homes around 10 p.m. to meet up. As they walked their neighborhood, they suddenly froze when they spotted a large silent ship with great enormous arms on the side that slowly swiveled around, and lines on ends like ropes, but not ropes. The girls had the distinct impression the ship was collecting things as it drifted from one home to the next, though they fled in terror as the craft soon turned its attention to them. Those they later told her the incident wrote the whole thing off as a run-in with a weather balloon, but according to one girl, if I'm sure of anything, it is that thing was no weather balloon. 14. Ghost Beam. While driving home from a concert in Pittsburgh, three friends spotted a very bright beam of light sweeping across the road ahead in the area around them. Two of the friends exited the vehicle expecting to catch a glimpse of a search and rescue helicopter, though they soon discovered there was no hint of any craft or body emitting the beam, even when it faced away from us. But as soon as the beam neared the car, it darted off, and they resumed their trip. The radio began playing static before cutting out completely. We heard a commentator say, "Further evidence that there's life on Mars," and then it went back to static, one witness recalled. 15. Phoenix Lights. Dubbed perhaps the most dramatic UFO sighting in recent years by Newfork, a group of lights, some say white, others red, appeared over Arizona in March 1997, flying in a V-shape across the sky. Dozens of people from all over the state reported seeing the phenomenon, with most claiming the display was totally silent, meaning airplanes couldn't have been responsible. Though officials at the Luke Air Force Base admitted at the time that multiple people had phoned in about the sighting, they later claimed they hadn't heard a thing about the incident. It wasn't until years later that the military finally came forward to reveal the Phoenix light had been nothing more than leftover flares. Right, flares. 16. Elk Abductor. As they were planting trees in a Washington forest, three foresters spotted a mysterious disc-shaped object hovering toward a herd of elk. As the herd fled from the craft, a lone elk broke off from the pack and was quickly beamed into the ship. The craft then rose, wobbling with the weight of the elk, before disappearing into the sky. A month later, Newfork director Peter Davenport traveled to Washington, where he was showed the carcass of a pregnant elk, found just a few miles from the forester site. They couldn't confirm if this particular elk was the one that had been abducted, but if it was, then that begged another question. Had it been pregnant before its alien encounter? 17. Blinded by the light. While lying in a bed in Boulder, Colorado motel in 1969, a member of the Air Force reported his room suddenly darkening, followed by a bright flash of light. When he returned to base the next day, his roommate totally freaked out at the sight of him, and for good reason. Apparently, the young serviceman's previously half-inch long hair had grown to be nearly 2 inches overnight. He later speculated that he'd been abducted and taken to a place where time moves faster than it does on Earth, though he couldn't say for sure. I still have trouble remembering many things as it's always been very foggy since that time. 18. Close Encounters. In 1982, a Leicester, England man awoke to find a soft light illuminating his bedroom, but the light wasn't coming from outside. Instead, it was apparently emanating from the face of a 4-foot-tall gray creature with a bulbous bald head and wide black eyes. The man pinched himself to see if he was dreaming, and he even tried to wake his wife so she could see the creature for herself. As soon as she stirred, the room went black and the alien vanished. "Did I imagine or dream the whole thing?" he wrote in his report. "Absolutely 1,000,000% no." 19. Don't have a cow. In 1975, two men were driving home from a fishing trip along the roads of LaFontaine, Indiana, when they spotted a flying disc with white lights revolving around it land behind a nearby farmhouse. When they arrived to investigate, they found no spacecraft, only cows running all over the road, frightened and mooing. Apparently, the cows had been frightened so badly they'd torn right through an electric fence. The two friends chose to keep the incident to themselves even when a neighbor came inquiring. He asked if we knew what had happened because cows don't just break down an electric fence for nothing. We didn't say anything about what we'd seen. 20. Unexplained Light Show. While parked on an overlook with his girlfriend in Olympia, Washington in 1991, a young man watched as what he thought was an abnormally bright star suddenly split into a sphere of 20 points of light. The sphere then began rotating rapidly and converged back into a single light, then turned completely red. From there, the object produced 5 more identical red lights which flashed in a synchronized manner as they flew through the sky in a straight line before disappearing. The young man actually managed to record the event, though the video only shows a blank screen with a few strange flickering whitish dots on it that seem to come and go.